beneath the waves, deeper than memory, older than myth, there lies a breath held for 10,000 years. A city not written in history books, but whispered through broken tablets, half-erased star maps, and dreams passed down through blood. They called it Atlantis, or perhaps they never called it anything at all. What if it was never just a tale? What if we are the aftershock of its fall? Tonight, we unravel a thread that has always been there, waiting. A path woven from ash, salt, and starlight. A haunting riddle scattered across continents and time. Come, let the wind pull back the veil. Welcome to Historic Sleep. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. They say Plato dreamed it, or borrowed it from an Egyptian priest speaking of memories older than the Nile. But why would a philosopher, meticulous in logic, lace his dialogue with a tale so vivid, so theatrical, and so unprovable? Atlantis was never named as a metaphor. It was named as a place, with borders, with kings, with technologies that defied its time. Why did he set its destruction precisely 9,000 years before Solon heard the tale? Why such specificity, if only to make a point? There's a fragment, brittle and scorched, recovered from the ruins of Heliopolis, long forgotten in the catalogues of modern archaeology. On it, in glyphs more eroded than remembered, is a name that does not belong to any pharaoh. A name strikingly close to Atlanu. No scholarly consensus exists. Some dismiss it as a misinterpretation of Aten. Others, more daring, suggest it refers to a land swallowed by water. But what if it isn't a coincidence? Imagine a civilization that bloomed not during recorded time, but long before time became a thing to be recorded. A superculture dispersed across coastlines that now sleep beneath oceans, possessing a language that required no alphabet, a science that merged with myth, and a memory encoded not in books, but in stone. Monoliths whose positions echo constellations that haven't aligned in tens of millennia. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent in Teotihuacan is thousands of miles and an ocean away from the sunken ridge near the Azores, where sonar once caught glimpses of symmetrical patterns beneath silt. Yet the mathematical proportions of that temple mirror those described in Plato's Atlantis. Concentric circles of land and water, spiraling inward like a memory, not just any geometry, but a fractal, repeated at micro and macro scales. How could that architectural logic reappear across oceans and eras unless it came from a common seed? A strange mineral was found buried beneath a layer of ash in southern Crete, fused with shards of pottery and an alloy unknown in classical metallurgy. Its isotopic composition suggests it originated from neither Earth's crust nor common meteoric matter. And yet, embedded within that same ash layer are bones, human but elongated, deformed not by disease but by deliberate binding, as if the shape of the skull was intended to be a vessel for something else. Knowledge, perhaps, or resonance. Let us now turn inward, beneath the layers of sediment and mythology, to the shape of memory itself. In almost every ancient culture there exists a myth of a great flood, not simply a deluge of rain, but a cosmic event. In Mesopotamia, the gods grew angry. In India, Manu was warned by a fish. In Mesoamerica, the fourth sun fell. In each version, there is a before and an after, a golden age and then silence. What if those stories weren't echoes of the same myth, but fragments of the same history? Shattered perspectives on a singular global trauma that reset the arc of civilization. If that is true, then Atlantis is not an anomaly. It is a cipher, a wound beneath the bandages of myth. There is a papyrus, rarely discussed, labeled Papyrus 1115 in the Cairo Museum. It speaks of a traveler from a shining land that no longer rises with the sun. He brings with him instruments, not weapons. He speaks all languages, but belongs to none. He is depicted with eyes like twin moons and a crown of 12 serpents. Was he a refugee or an emissary? And did his people fall to punishment, pride, or something else? Something not moral, but cosmic? Consider the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, a sudden cooling event around 12,800 years ago, marked by a spike in platinum levels, nanodiamonds, and melted glass across North America and parts of Europe. The timing coincides unnervingly with Plato's proposed date for Atlantis's fall. If a fragmenting comet struck the ice caps, it would have caused floods, fire, and darkness. A global trauma, a mass extinction. But what it may have also buried is memory. In Göbekli Tepe, that ancient temple older than Stonehenge, one pillar, Pillar 43, depicts a vulture, a scorpion, and a sphere falling from the sky. Astronomers suggest it's a star map, an encoding of the same date marked by the comet impact. Did the builders know? Were they warning us or remembering? And if they remembered, who told them? A question lingers, trembling just at the edge of articulation. What if Atlantis was not just real, but foundational? Not the first civilization, but the last of a previous cycle? What if history, as we know it, is not a line, but a spiral? Rising and falling with celestial rhythms we've barely begun to understand? And then there is the symbol of the trident, found not only in Greek lore, clutched by Poseidon, but carved into pre-Vedic seals in the Indus Valley, etched into stones in the Andes, mirrored in the ritual staffs of Oceania. It is not just a weapon, it is a tuning fork. 3 prongs, 3 frequencies. A resonance. Was it a memory of sound technology, a device to manipulate water? Or was it a symbol of an idea? Something about the structure of the universe itself. You see, the Atlanteans, if they existed, may not have thought in the way we do. To them, language could have been sung rather than spoken. Geometry, alive with meaning. Time, not linear but cyclical, like the Ouroboros that appears in cultures with no contact across the ages. We, in our modern arrogance, presume they were less evolved. But what if we are simply less aligned? If the flood did come, it didn't just drown cities. It erased context. It shattered continuity. All that remained were symbols, scattered like bones. A spiral here, a serpent there, a myth of a king who could command the sea, a circle of fire in the sky, a number carved into a rock. And beneath it all, the whisper persists. They were real. They were lost. And we are the amnesiacs, wandering in the ruins of their forgetting. Perhaps that's why we dream of Atlantis, not as fantasy, but as memory. A memory not quite ours. Not yet. The ocean does not forget. It merely holds. In its depthless silence, it archives our arrogance, our architectures, and our unanswered questions. Somewhere beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, there lies a jagged stretch of seabed called the Madeira Abyssal Plain. Few ships pass directly over it. Fewer still speak of what was found there in 1973 during a seismic survey meant to map tectonic fault lines. What the sensors recorded was neither natural nor expected. Beneath layers of sediment, they traced a perfect rectangle, nearly 8 kilometers long, aligned to cardinal directions. Too angular, too symmetrical, too persistent across different sonar sweeps to be coincidence. Officially, the anomaly was attributed to submarine basaltic formations. The report was buried beneath oceanographic data, but a copy made its way to the archives of a private foundation, one dedicated to researching pre-Diluvian civilizations. That same year, off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas, divers discovered what appeared to be a massive stone road, now known as the Bimini Road. Giant, interlocking limestone blocks stretching like a forgotten avenue beneath the shallows. While many claim it is a natural beach rock formation, there are features that resist this dismissal. Smooth right angles, consistent spacing, and beneath some blocks, flat paved foundations that would have no reason to exist in nature. If you trace a line from the Bimini Road to the anomaly near Madeira, and then further east to the submerged structures off the coast of Yonaguni in Japan, you find a triangulation that suggests intentionality. A global net, perhaps, remnants of a civilization whose reach exceeded our own, yet whose story remains scattered in broken glyphs and buried halls. And then there are the skulls. They have been found in Paracas, in the deserts of Peru. Not deformed through cradle boarding, as once assumed, but naturally elongated, with cranial volumes 25% larger than average humans. The foramen magnum, the hole through which the spinal cord connects to the skull, is in a different position. DNA tests yield inconclusive results, containing mitochondrial markers not consistent with any known human lineage. The mainstream calls them anomalies. But anomalies do not repeat themselves across continents, across oceans, across eras. One appears in Crimea, another in the Altai Mountains, another, strangely, in Malta, an island whose ancient hypogem contains subterranean chambers acoustically tuned to resonate at 111 Hz, a frequency that, according to recent neuroscience, activates the part of the brain associated with intuition and out-of-body experience. The oracle room, they call it. But who tuned it? And for what voice? You begin to sense the pattern, don't you? A civilization not defined by borders but by frequency, not by war but by vibration. In ancient Sanskrit texts, the Rig Veda, the Upanishads, there are whispers of a sound, the primordial Om, that birthed the universe. In quantum field theory, vibration underlies the nature of all matter. So what if this ancient civilization, this Atlantis, was not primitive but attuned? What if their cities sang? What if their machines ran not on combustion but on harmonics? The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, though considered apocryphal by academia, describe the Atlanteans as masters of sound who could lift stone with a song. Hyperbole, perhaps, or perhaps not. In 1997, Tibetan monks were observed using drums, trumpets, and chants to levitate small stones during secret ceremonies. The effect was dismissed as folklore, but the math behind acoustic levitation is not. Scientists today can suspend small objects using nothing but precisely tuned sound waves. Now imagine scaling that up, not with steel, but with resonance. In this light, the myth of the Tower of Babel becomes more than a tale of divine punishment. It becomes a warning about frequency misalignment, a catastrophic discord. Perhaps the Atlanteans, in their final days, lost harmony with something greater than themselves. The earth, the stars, time itself. There is a passage in the Zohar, a foundational Kabbalistic text, that speaks of a city that sank beneath the sea because its words no longer matched the heavens. Language, it implies, was once a key, a tuning device. When that language became corrupted, so did the reality it was meant to sustain. Atlantis, then, did not fall to war, but to dissonance. And yet, fragments remain. A tablet in Tikal depicts a figure with arms raised to the sky, surrounded by spiraling glyphs interpreted as sound patterns. In Aboriginal Australia, the song lines describe invisible pathways that crisscross the continent, created by the songs of ancestral beings. The belief is not metaphorical. The land was sung into being. In Polynesia, navigators memorize star maps by rhythm, by chant, sailing thousands of miles guided not by instruments, but by memory woven in music. What if these are not cultural flourishes, but ancestral inheritances from a time when sound shaped stone and thought shaped form? Even in modern science, there are glimpses. Cymatics, the visualization of sound, reveals that specific frequencies can generate complex, geometric patterns in dust, water, and metal. At 432 Hz, a simple tone creates spirals and mandalas. At 528 Hz, the so-called miracle frequency, patterns emerge resembling cellular regeneration. Could it be that Atlantis, in its prime, had decoded the geometry of vibration? And when the Great Collapse came, whether from comet, flood, or rupture in alignment, what they lost was not just cities. It was coherence. They had no need for satellites, no need for written language. Their knowledge was embedded in structure and sound, in myth and mythos. And so we find ourselves today chasing ghosts, digging beneath oceans, decoding spirals, dismissing songs as superstition while forgetting that the universe itself vibrates. Maybe the question is not, what if Atlantis was real? Maybe the question is, what if we are its echo? And the song is still playing, just faintly. Beneath the static, it begins with a spiral, not carved into stone or painted on cave walls, but rotating endlessly above us, the Milky Way. A galaxy that turns so slowly we mistake it for stillness. Yet its arms stretch like ancient limbs, carrying with them stars, dust, and forgotten trajectories. The Dogon tribe of Mali, isolated for centuries in the cliffs of Bandiagara, have, in their oral traditions, described Sirius not as a single star, but as a binary system. They speak of Sirius A and Sirius B, the second being invisible to the naked eye, dense beyond comprehension, and orbiting the first in a precise cycle of 50 years. They have known this for centuries, long before telescopes could confirm it. How? The Dogon elders attribute this knowledge not to observation, but to Nomo, amphibious beings who came from the sky in a spinning vessel trailing fire. Beings who, they say, brought language, structure, and the rhythm of the stars. It is easy, comfortable even, to dismiss this as myth. But if you peer through the lens of archaeology, cross-check it with the Sumerian Oans, the Apkallu of Mesopotamia, or the Dagon cult of the Philistines, the same imagery returns. Beings of the deep, wisdom bringers cloaked in aquatic form. Could these legends be degraded memories of Atlanteans? Not aliens, but survivors, descendants of a civilization that retreated beneath the ocean or fled to the mountains, or simply became myth to protect what was left of them. In the Andes, at 13,000 feet above sea level, lie the megalithic ruins of Puma Punku, massive stone blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, carved with precision that modern stonemasons struggle to replicate. The H-shaped stones slot together like components of a machine. The angles, perfect. The boreholes, uniform. But there are no inscriptions, no signs of scaffolding, no remnants of the tools that could have achieved such refinement. Mainstream historians attribute the work to the Tiwanaku culture around 500 AD, but the stone, diorite, is so hard that only diamonds can cut it, and the structures show signs of being scattered by a cataclysm, not weathered by time. Beneath the foundational layers, radiocarbon dating has yielded dates as far back as 12,000 years, which places its construction, if true, squarely within the same epoch as the Younger Dryas. So we return again to the fracture point, to a time when something immense ended, and something lesser began. And in that moment of collapse, perhaps the remnants of Atlantis did not disappear entirely. Perhaps they fractured into stories, into stones, into bloodlines. Not a single sunken city, but a diaspora of knowing. Seeds of a once unified world scattered across the globe, buried in temples, encoded in myths, sung in lullabies that outlast empires. In Cambodia, the temples of Angkor mirror the constellation Draco, and the complex itself aligns with solstices and equinoxes across a 26,000-year cycle, matching the precession of the equinoxes. Who thinks on such time scales? Why would a medieval civilization mirror a cosmic cycle only visible from space? Unless they inherited that vision from those who had already charted the sky, not as explorers, but as kin to the cosmos. You begin to sense that Atlantis, as Plato described, may not have been merely a city. It may have been a paradigm, a way of seeing the world not as fragmented domains, but as a unified organism. Architecture wasn't just shelter, it was vibration. Agriculture wasn't just sustenance, it was ceremony. Politics wasn't control, it was alignment with celestial law. They called their central island Posidonia, not just after the god of the sea, but possibly derived from older Proto-Indo-European roots, meaning Lord of the Abyss. They understood, perhaps, that life did not ascend from land, but emerged from the deep, returning to it in cycles. Perhaps their knowledge of the sea was not just navigational, but ontological. They did not conquer the ocean. They listened to it. And then, there is the mystery of Atlantis's power source. Plato described a peculiar metal, orichalcum, second only to gold in value, said to emit a red gleam. For centuries it was thought to be fictional, until 2015, when marine archaeologists recovered 39 ingots from a 2,600-year-old shipwreck off the coast of Sicily. Spectrographic analysis revealed a complex alloy of copper, zinc, nickel, lead, and iron. Its color? A metallic blush. Ancient forgers seemed to have achieved a kind of proto-brass, possibly electroplated. Why? Was it aesthetic, ritual, or functional? Designed to conduct something no longer understood. Modern researchers have begun experimenting with alloyed metals in high-frequency resonance chambers. Certain blends, when subjected to specific Hertz ranges, exhibit magnetic field anomalies, minute but measurable. What if orichalcum was more than currency? What if it was a key, part of an energetic system lost in the collapse? We think of energy as linear, consumable. Burn fuel, produce work. But what if the Atlanteans approached power the way a musician approaches an instrument, with tuning, with balance, with humility? There is a basin near Lake Titicaca called the Uros Islands, where ancient people constructed floating cities on bundled reeds. The tradition persists today, but the origin story tells of people fleeing a great fire from the sea. The myth says the sky turned red, and the waters rose, and the stars realigned, and that a golden man with eyes of stone led them to safety, walking across the lake's surface like it was earth. Who was he? Where did he come from? And why do similar tales echo in Polynesia, in Egypt, in the forgotten glyphs of Easter Island? We begin to see a web, not of trade, but of transmission, not of conquest, but of resonance. The further we dig, the more we find not randomness, but recurrence, a spiral. And like all spirals, it leads inward, back to the source, back to the silence before the fall, back to Atlantis, or perhaps forward, toward a remembering yet to come. There is a map, not drawn in ink, but etched in alignment. It stretches from the pyramids of Giza to the stone circles of Nabta Playa, from the ziggurats of Ur to the forgotten earthworks in the Amazon. A geodetic grid, ancient and precise, mapping not just geography, but geometry. Along this invisible lattice, the great monuments of the world seem to sit, not randomly but rhythmically. It is as if the earth itself was once tuned like an instrument, and these sites were the nodes where the chords were struck. But who could have drawn such a map in an age we call prehistoric? Perhaps those who remembered what the earth once was, before the axis shifted, before the oceans rose, before the veil of myth was pulled over our collective eyes. In 1513, Piri Reis, an Ottoman admiral and cartographer, composed a map now housed in Istanbul. It shows the coast of South America in remarkable detail, but more curiously, it shows Antarctica. Not as we know it today, buried in miles of ice, but as it would appear, ice-free. Modern geology confirms that such conditions last occurred over 6,000 years ago, or perhaps even 12,000. Yet the map itself was copied from older sources, some of which the admiral claimed dated back to the Library of Alexandria. If so, then what knowledge was lost in that fire? What memory was incinerated when Caesar's soldiers or Theophilus's mob destroyed that sacred archive? And more haunting, who first charted the world before we knew it was a sphere? In the Indian Mahabharata, there are descriptions of flying chariots, vimanas, capable of emitting a roar like a lion and moving as fast as the wind. They were said to be powered not by combustion, but by a mercurial vortex stored in something called a mercury iron engine. It sounds like madness, until you consider that NASA has studied mercury-based plasma propulsion, and that ancient texts repeatedly describe spinning, disc-shaped craft built not for war, but for communion with the stars. Could it be that Atlantis did not sink into the sea because of war or arrogance alone, but because it became too aligned, too close to something the cosmos could no longer tolerate in balance? Like a note held too long in a symphony, maybe it became dissonant by precision itself. In Baalbek, Lebanon, there lies a stone, the trilithon, each slab weighing over 800 tons. They rest not as if dropped, but as if placed, perfectly level. No modern crane can lift them in their current form. The Romans built upon the site, but even they admitted the foundation predated them. Some say giants placed the stones, others gods. But neither giants nor gods leave tool marks. Civilizations do. We are told time moves forward. But if history is a spiral, then memory curls back onto itself. Imagine a people who did not divide day and night by minutes, but by harmonics, who could predict solar eclipses not through algorithms, but through song, who saw the human body not as matter, but as vibration, organs tuned to frequencies, disease as dissonance. This is not fantasy. Ancient Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic chant, and even modern cymatic healing all point to the body's responsiveness to tone. What if Atlantis was the apex of that understanding? And when it fell, the knowledge was scattered, not entirely lost, but broken into pieces too large to swallow whole. Fragments of a great mirror, now reflecting only slivers of what once was. Consider the Dendera light. In the Temple of Hathor in Egypt, there is a relief showing a figure holding what appears to be a bulb, complete with a filament-like serpent inside, and wires feeding into a base. To mainstream archaeologists, it's symbolic, a mythic lotus flower birthing light. But to electrical engineers, the shape is suspiciously familiar. Could it be that the Atlantean knowledge of light wasn't metaphoric, but literal? And if so, then what other technologies have we misread as metaphor? The Ark of the Covenant, rumored to emit deadly force and radiate energy, was stored behind insulation-like veils. Was it divine? Or was it an artifact, dangerous, misunderstood, and misused? The philosopher's stone, said to transmute base metals into gold. Perhaps not a stone, but a principle, a resonance, an Atlantean formula not for alchemy, but for energetic transformation. If Atlantis once was, and if its fragments remain, then its legacy may not be in the stones we see, but in the structures we don't recognize, in the stories we ignore, in the dreams that return, generation after generation, whispering of a place that feels like home, though no map can find it. Plato claimed the Atlanteans became corrupt, that they waged war beyond their bounds, that they challenged the gods and were struck down. But what if his words, too, were veiled? What if the gods were forces of nature, and the challenge was not hubris, but resonance pushed too far? Like a singer shattering glass, perhaps they simply reached a pitch the earth could no longer hold. And then came the water, a flood not just of sea, but of forgetting. The deluge, the reset. But memory, like stone, resists. Somewhere beneath Lake Vostok in Antarctica, under miles of ice, a radar anomaly stretches hundreds of square miles. A dome, perfectly hemispheric. An echo, perhaps, of a civilization entombed in ice. And we are told not to look too closely. We are told it is natural, just like we were told the pyramids were tombs, and the Sphinx no older than the pharaohs. But stone speaks, and ice remembers. Atlantis, if it was, still is. Not as city, not as legend, but as frequency, waiting to be remembered. A circle, a serpent, and an eye. These three symbols appear again and again across cultures with no known connection. In the sands of Egypt, in the stones of Scandinavia, in the carvings of Mesoamerica, they persist, always intertwined, always watching. To the untrained eye, they are mythic abstractions. But if you step sideways, just slightly, they begin to resemble a kind of code, a memory encrypted in symbol. The serpent devouring its tail, the Ouroboros, is more than a metaphor. It is a geometry of recurrence, a world without beginning or end, a civilization not progressing, but pulsing, not linear, but cyclical. This idea, once whispered by the ancients, is now being mirrored by modern physics, where time is no longer seen as a straight arrow, but a quantum field, looping, folding, reversing upon itself under certain conditions. What if the Atlanteans knew this? What if they didn't just theorize cycles? They lived by them, built their cities, their myths, their technologies upon the breath of time expanding and contracting. It said that beneath the sands of the Sahara lie the remnants of green valleys and ancient lakes. The Rishat structure, also known as the Eye of the Sahara, sits in Mauritania like a fingerprint carved into the earth. 3 concentric rings, stretching nearly 30 miles in diameter. When viewed from above, it aligns uncannily with Plato's description of Atlantis. Alternating circles of water and land, centered on a raised island, protected by mountains to the north, open to the south. Geologists call it a natural formation, the result of erosion and uplift. But if it is natural, then nature has a strange way of mimicking myth. And the roads, yes, roads, visible in satellite images, running straight into its center, remain unexplained. Who walked there? What did they build before the sand swallowed it whole? And more curious still, how did Plato, writing from Greece, describe it so precisely if he had never seen it? Unless the memory was older than Greece, older than Egypt, perhaps not written, but sung. A kind of oral cartography passed down through priesthoods, mystery schools, and dreamlines. A memory of a land that once was heart of the world, and then was not. The Hopi people of North America speak of the Third World, a time of great technological power, of flying shields and cities of light. They say it ended in fire, flood, and ice. Their elders describe the fall not as punishment, but as consequence. The Kachinas, star beings, and spirit guides warned them to return to balance. But not all listened. In this way, the stories always echo: a golden age, a warning, a fall. But perhaps Atlantis was not only a casualty. Perhaps it was a sanctuary first. A redoubt of wisdom carried forward from an even older cycle. A civilization already old when the earth was young. In the Indus Valley, long before the Vedas were written, cities like Mohenjo-daro thrived with astonishing sophistication. Gridded streets, advanced drainage, standardized weights. Yet no palaces, no tombs, no temples of domination, just architecture built for function, harmony, and community, and when they vanished, they left no record of war. Only silence. What if they, too, were a splinter of Atlantis, a colony that remembered, faintly, how to build in rhythm with the earth? And what of language? In Sumer, the first known written language appeared fully formed, with complex grammar and symbolic abstraction. It did not evolve. It arrived. Scholars call it a mystery. But perhaps it wasn't born there. Perhaps it was inherited. A remembered tongue, fracturing into dialects as it traveled, like light bending through the prism of forgetting. The Atlantean tongue, if it existed, may not have sounded like ours at all. Perhaps it was tonal. Perhaps it vibrated with the very geometry it described. A language that carried not just meaning, but structure. Like Sanskrit, where each syllable holds mathematical resonance. Or ancient Hebrew, where letters are both sound and number, tool and key. This brings us to the temples, not just places of worship, but machines of memory. In Malta, beneath the megalithic surface structures, the Hal Saflieni hypogum holds an acoustic chamber tuned to precisely 111 Hz, the same frequency found in other ancient oracular sites. Studies show this frequency affects the prefrontal cortex, enhancing intuition and theta brainwave activity. Visitors report visions, auditory hallucinations, and shifts in consciousness. It is not accidental. It is engineered. By whom? By those who understood that stone could shape thought, that vibration could bridge dimensions, that memory could be held not just in books, but in space. The Atlanteans, if real, may have considered temples as harmonic engines, not places to worship gods, but to commune with the deep field of existence. And perhaps, when the fall came, they encoded their last warnings in these resonant chambers, hoping that one day someone would hear and remember. In Bolivia, the ancient city of Tiahuanaco features the Gateway of the Sun, an archway carved with enigmatic figures, some resembling astronauts, others like animals in impossible combinations. Above them all, the central figure holds two staffs and wears a radiant headdress. His eyes are wide, sorrowful. His mouth is open, not shouting but singing. A chant caught in stone. Was he a king? Or the last priest of a dying harmonic order? We may never know. But the image persists, just as it does in the Sphinx, whose erosion patterns suggest it once faced rainstorms that haven't fallen there in over 10,000 years. Just as it does in the submerged ruins off the coast of Cuba, where sonar has mapped straight lines and angular corridors over 2,000 feet below sea level. Pieces. Always pieces. Always asking to be seen, never demanding to be believed. Atlantis, if it ever was, never begged for recognition. It sang, it dreamed, it remembered. And now, perhaps, in the flicker of frequencies rediscovered, in the resonance of forgotten temples, in the slow spiral of our own awakening, it stirs once more. Not as proof, but as presence, a pressure just beneath the veil. A mirror submerged does not lose its reflection. It simply distorts, rippling, shifting, softening the edges of what once was sharp. Perhaps that is how Atlantis survives, not in stone alone, but in dream, in the inner architecture of myth, dreamt again and again by cultures that never touched each other's shores. Why do the same shapes emerge? The same fears, the same gods, the same longing for a golden land lost to the sea? Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of symbols, myths, and dreams embedded within the human psyche. But what if this unconscious is not just psychological, but archaeological? What if it is the echo of a memory too old to name, too vast to place, so it survives the only way it can, through symbol? The spiral again, the eye, the sunken city beneath the waves. In the aboriginal dreamtime, the rainbow serpent slithers through the land, shaping rivers and mountains, leaving behind sacred spaces where the earth remembers the song that created it. It is a being of power, yes, but also of memory. It returns, it renews, it spirals. Across the world, in the pre-Columbian city of Chichen Itza, the Kukulkan pyramid reveals a feathered serpent descending in light every equinox, an illusion cast by the sun onto the stone steps. Not a symbol, a performance, a reenactment of celestial return. These are not coincidences. These are remnants, stage plays of the deep past, whose scripts were carved in angles, light, and rhythm, whose meaning has blurred, but whose presence still pulses beneath. There is a word in Nahuatl, Nepantla, meaning the in-between, the space between waking and dream, land and sea, life and death. It is a space sacred to creation, transformation, memory. And perhaps it is where Atlantis now dwells, not erased, not fictional, but suspended in Nepantla, awaiting alignment. In Siberia's frozen tundras, strange megaliths lie scattered in the Valley of Death. Black, metallic domes half submerged in permafrost, predating known civilization. The Yakuts speak of them with fear, calling them the cauldrons. Places where those who sleep near them sicken, dream strange dreams, or never wake at all. Scientists avoid the area. Magnetometers malfunction. Birds do not nest. What are they? Observation posts, instruments, or the remnants of something buried long before the last glaciation? And further west, in the Caucasus Mountains, legends speak of a vanished city beneath the Caspian Sea, its gates sealed by gods, its knowledge hidden until the stars return to their ancient alignment. The water there hums, not with current, but with tone. A low, continuous resonance that divers have recorded, but cannot explain. Could it be that Atlantis exists not only in space, but in frequency? That its doors cannot be opened by force, but by vibration? When the ancients spoke of keys, they did not always mean metal. They meant tones, pitches, chords. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers teach humanity the secrets of heaven, not spells, but harmonics, how to read the stars, how to carve symbols that vibrate, knowledge that must not be abused, but it was. And so came the flood. But what if that flood was not only water? What if it was the drowning of resonance? A great silencing of tone, the resetting of frequency, not just to destroy, but to protect. To protect what? A memory, a portal, a civilization encoded not in stone, but in song. We know now that DNA responds to vibration. That cellular function can be enhanced or disrupted by frequency. We have seen the double helix dance under the influence of sound waves. Could it be that the Atlanteans knew this? That their medicine was not chemical, but harmonic? That healing came not from ingestion, but immersion, in tone, in light, in sacred geometry? Even now, across Europe, stone circles and dolmens hum with energy. Dowsers feel it, animals respond, instruments pick up spikes in magnetism, electric field shifts. The circles are not random. They are harmonic nodes, resonance chambers of a long-forgotten earth grid. Stonehenge, long thought to be an observatory, has been shown to enhance acoustic vibration. Its inner ring, when reconstructed in models, produces powerful resonances. Was it a calendar, a temple, or a speaker system? A way to tune the earth, or the human within it? The Atlanteans, if they were its architects or inheritors, may have seen no boundary between technology and spirit. To them, a circuit and a sigil were not opposites, but expressions of the same law, electricity and divinity, two names for the same current. We find whispers of this in the Temple of Osiris at Abydos. Carvings on a ceiling beam depict what appear to be advanced machines, a helicopter, a submarine, even a modern plane. Scholars say it is palimpsest, overlapping hieroglyphs eroded into illusion. But others insist the forms are too precise, too purposeful. And still the question rises, if these are echoes, where is the source? Perhaps deep beneath the ice of Greenland, where gravity anomalies suggest massive, artificial voids, measured, rectangular, sealed in ice thicker than history, or in the Mariana Trench, where signals have emerged, non-biological, patterned, repeating over decades. Oceanographers record them. No explanation holds. Just tone. A song. Faint, submerged, cycling. Always returning. Like a breath that was never exhaled. Perhaps that is the truth of Atlantis. Not a place to be found, but a memory to be retuned. A code written into the very frequency of life, waiting to be heard again. And perhaps that is why we are drawn to it. Not out of curiosity, but recognition. Like a half-remembered word on the edge of speech. Like a chord we once knew long ago, and still ache to hum again. The past is not behind us. It circles. It spirals. And sometimes, in the stillness between frequencies, it calls. In the dead silence before dawn, there is a moment when the world feels hollow, like it is waiting to be filled, not with noise, but with memory, not with sunlight, but with something older, a vibration beneath the stillness. That moment, fleeting and fragile, was once known by name. The Egyptians called it Zep Tepi, the first time. A sacred beginning when gods walked among men, when the Nile ran clear with starlight, when temples rose from mud not by labor, but by intention. And always, at the center of Zep Tepi, is a fall, a shattering, a forgetting. The Atlanteans may not have called it Zep Tepi, but their myths echo it. A golden age that was broken. A time when the world pulsed in harmony with the heavens. And then, it did not. Something fractured. Something changed the key of the earth. In the Andes, the myths speak of Viracocha, the great bearded god who emerged from the sea after a cataclysm and walked among the people, teaching them to build, to write, to live in balance. He came, they say, from a sunken land in the east. He walked alone, cloaked in white. When his work was done, he left. Not in death, but in disappearance. He promised to return. The parallels are impossible to ignore. Across oceans and languages, these luminous visitors, always described with flowing robes, radiant faces, eyes like light, arrive after a great flood. They come not with war, but with wisdom. They replant what was lost, and always they leave again, not out of failure, but as if by design. Were they gods? Were they survivors? Or were they fragments of a larger mind, scattered to seed the next age? Consider Easter Island, Rapa Nui, where massive Moai statues stand, staring inland, not out to sea. They are not mere decorations. Many are buried to their torsos, their bases carved with petroglyphs of spirals, hands, and unknown sigils. Local legends speak of Hotu Matua, a king who came from a far-off, sunken land. He brought sacred knowledge in a chest, knowledge only certain bloodlines could unlock. The Rongorongo script, still undeciphered, may be a remnant of that transmission, a language not meant to be spoken, but sung. And what of the heads themselves? Silent watchers, faces that do not decay. Were they markers, receivers, anchors of memory? We do not know, but they face inward, always inward, as if the sea is not the threat but the echo. There is a phenomenon observed in deep meditation, the soundless sound, a low hum heard not by the ear but by the body. Yogis speak of it, monks chant toward it. In certain caves beneath Mount Shasta, explorers have reported hearing tones without source, frequencies that resonate in bone but not in air. This is not hallucination. It has been measured. Ultrasonic frequencies with no environmental cause. And often, accompanying them, are dreams. Dreams of cities beneath water, of golden light refracting through coral pillars, of music that teaches rather than entertains. Could these dreams be memories? Genetic, energetic? Could the body remember what the mind has forgotten? In the Hebrew Kabbalah, the tree of life maps the universe as a system of energies. At the center lies Tiferet, beauty, harmony, balance. It is said that the original creation, the first world, was shattered because the vessels of form could not hold the light of divinity. The shards fell. The world we know is one of these fragments. It is a theology of trauma, and it mirrors, in eerie symmetry, the fall of Atlantis, the idea that something too perfect must break. Not as punishment, but as unfolding. Perhaps Atlantis was not a city in decline, but a vessel reaching critical frequency, shining too brightly, holding too much coherence. And when it cracked, the light refracted across the world, in fragments, in glyphs, in stone. Look to the Lascaux caves in France, 20,000 years old. Animals drawn not as they appear in life, but as if mid-motion, vibrating, layered. Some figures appear with multiple limbs, like echoes. Not decoration, but depiction. Of what? Vision? Memory? A world half in and half out of form? Among the drawings is a strange geometric pattern, a series of dots and lines that match no known language. But when analyzed as musical notation, they suggest a rhythm, a pulse. Could it be a song? Could it be the ghost of one? Atlantis, then, may not be a city we can dig up. It may be a city we have to remember. And memory is not always in the brain. Sometimes it is in the blood. Sometimes it is in the silence between breaths. Sometimes it is in the way the wind moves through stone and makes no sound, but still sings. So we chase it. Through myth, through ruin, through dreams. We chase a feeling more than a fact. A sense that something vast and kind and whole once was, and might be again, but only if we learn how to listen. There is a silence beneath volcanoes, a silence that precedes eruption not with absence, but with tension. In that pause, the world gathers itself, breath held, pressure swelling, and then the release. Fire, ash, renewal. Some say Atlantis burned before it drowned. That fire came first, ripping through temples and towers, followed by a wave so immense it washed the very name of the land from memory. The island of Thera, now called Santorini, holds the scar. Around 1600 BCE, it exploded with such violence that the blast could be heard in Egypt. The sky blackened for weeks, and waves thundered across the Mediterranean. Ash fell as far as Anatolia. Some archaeologists suggest this eruption is the origin of the Atlantis myth. But the timelines do not align. Plato's Atlantis fell 9,000 years before Solon. The destruction of Thera is recent in comparison. Yet there's something haunting in the ruins of Akrotiri, a city preserved in ash like Pompeii. The art on the walls is not that of a struggling Bronze Age port. It is vibrant, poised, sophisticated. Dolphins leap through waves. Priestesses in layered robes hold strange implements. Not tools, not weapons, devices. And then the silence. No bodies, no chaos. As if they knew, as if they left. Where did they go? Further west, beneath the Atlantic shelf, sonar scans reveal what might be megalithic structures, symmetrical ridges and stepped forms buried in silt. Dismissed as geological anomaly, yet mirrored eerily by similar findings off the coasts of Cuba, India, and Japan. Always underwater. Always at depths corresponding to sea levels from 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, just after the Ice Age ended and the oceans rose. What if they didn't drown in one night? What if they retreated? Piece by piece, wave by wave. What if the myth of a single great deluge is a compression, an echo of rising waters swallowing cities slowly, persistently, century by century? And the survivors, those few who held the knowledge, scattered. Not to rule, but to seed. In Indonesia, the temple complex of Gunung Padang rests atop a mountain once thought to be a natural hill. But deep scans have revealed chamber after chamber beneath the visible structure, layers of stone far older than any known Javanese culture. Carbon dating of organic materials lodged in cracks suggests an age of over 11,000 years. Again, the same epoch. Again, the same silence from history. Was this another outpost? Or a memory preserved in architecture, waiting to be unearthed when the world was ready to ask the right questions? The Sufi mystics speak of Alam al-Mithal, the imaginal world. Not imagination, but a real metaphysical realm accessible through dreams, meditation, and spiritual discipline. It is said that great truths reside there, truths that cannot survive the density of this world. Perhaps Atlantis has become that kind of place, folded not just in time and sea, but in dimensional fabric. Perhaps those who dream of it touch more than fantasy. In the American Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans built cities aligned with the solstices, with walls and windows that mark lunar standstills, events occurring every 18.6 years. Chaco Canyon hums with geometric precision. Some glyphs there resemble spirals within spirals, patterns found in galaxies, DNA, and hurricanes. A signature of life repeating itself at all scales. Why would ancient builders inscribe such forms unless they knew? Unless they remembered? In modern physics, string theory proposes that reality is composed not of particles, but of vibrating strings, each frequency a different expression of matter. Some theorists suggest that our universe is but one in a sea of oscillating dimensions. What if the Atlanteans had reached a point of resonance so refined they slipped between? What if their fall was not an end, but a transition? And some remained behind. Not entirely human, not entirely gone. There are stories of subterranean beings, bright-skinned, large-eyed, silent-speaking, living beneath the earth in vast cavern systems. From Tibet to the Andes to the Appalachians, the tales recur. The Agarti, the Ant People, the Deros. Wild invention? Or distorted memory of those who went below, not to hide, but to protect something? In Cappadocia, the Derinkuyu underground city descends over 200 feet, with air shafts, food storage, living quarters for thousands. No soot stains the ceilings. No obvious source of lighting. It was not built to survive winter. It was built to survive something else. And the doors, massive rolling stones sealed from the inside. Who did they fear? Or what did they await? Above ground, the stars moved. The world changed. The memory faded. But underground, the tone may have persisted. In the high Himalayas, there are monks who chant at frequencies that cause their skin temperature to rise, even in freezing cold. Science confirms the phenomenon but cannot explain its origin. The chants themselves are not random. They are tonal keys, harmonic codes passed through centuries of oral lineage. What are they unlocking? The human body? The earth? Or something older? The Atlanteans may not have died in water or fire, but in resonance. They may have ascended into myth because the world lost the ability to hear them. Not out of punishment, but out of phase. And now the frequencies shift again. The poles wander. The magnetosphere weakens. The Schumann resonance, the Earth's background heartbeat, fluctuates beyond recorded patterns. Is the song changing? Or is it being remembered? Perhaps Atlantis is not waiting to be discovered, but to be harmonized. Not by archaeologists with spades, but by dreamers with ears tuned to silence. Perhaps it's already here, just one octave out of reach. Somewhere in the folds of Himalayan wind, where breath turns to frost and thought loses its edges, there are whispers of Shambhala, the hidden kingdom. Not a metaphor, not a heaven, but a place, a sanctuary of knowledge preserved from the last turning of the wheel. Monks speak of it not as legend, but as geography distorted by spirit. A city of radiant minds, invisible to those who cannot match its vibration. Could it be that Shambhala is a final echo of Atlantis, refracted through centuries of retelling and transmutation? Not a physical mirror, but a harmonic twin, a place built not in stone, but in frequency. The Tibetan Kalachakra texts describe it as protected by mountains of crystal, invisible to invaders, revealed only in cycles of planetary alignment. The entrance, they say, opens not through conquest, but through inner calibration. A resonance between seeker and sanctuary. Why does this sound familiar? Because Plato, too, wrote of Atlantis as a place shaped by ideal proportions, where the laws of geometry governed society and the soul was measured in balance. The idea of a hidden land, once open and now sealed, haunts every culture. Eden, El Dorado, Avalon, a place we came from or must return to, always distant, always just out of reach. But what if the exile was not geographic? What if it was vibrational? In the temples of ancient Egypt, priests were not merely ceremonial figures. They were keepers of resonance. The very word temple, from the Latin templum, meant a space marked out for communion between worlds. Temples were not just built, they were tuned, aligned with stars, harmonized with the earth's pulse. The Great Pyramid's King's Chamber resonates precisely at 432 Hz, the so-called universal frequency, linked to patterns found in the cosmos, nature, and even the Fibonacci sequence. Coincidence? Or continuity? What if Atlantis didn't fall but phased out? A civilization so attuned, it became incompatible with the dissonance that followed the cataclysm. Like a note no longer fitting the chord. Like light beyond the visible spectrum. In the texts of Pythagoras, geometry and music were inseparable. He taught that the soul was a harmony, and that disorder within the self was a distortion of cosmic rhythm. His teachings echo those attributed to the Atlanteans, wisdom preserved not in conquest, but in calculus, not in empire, but in the quiet discipline of ratios. And now, centuries later, we rediscover these truths in quantum mechanics, in string theory, in the realization that reality is less particle than pattern. What then is memory? Not a recording, a resonance, an imprint left in space, awaiting the right frequency to activate. Consider quartz crystal. It holds vibration. It stores information. The very device you listen to now depends on it. But the ancients used quartz too, embedding it in temples, embedding it in amulets, embedding it perhaps in the very bones of their architecture. Not as decoration, as data. The Ark of the Covenant, described as a gold-covered chest containing tablets of divine code, was also a capacitor. Gold, wood, gold. A layered conductor, surrounded by ritual, veiled in mystery. Its touch could kill or enlighten, depending on preparation. It was said to be carried before armies, but never used. It was said to speak. Is that a relic? Or a residue? In the Hopi tradition, the earth has passed through 3 worlds before this one, each destroyed by imbalance, fire, ice, flood. In each cycle, a few were saved, not randomly, but ritually, chosen not by blood, but by vibration. The 4th world, the one we now inhabit, is on the cusp of ending, they say. The 5th waits. But entry is not guaranteed. Only those in alignment may pass through the gate. And again we return to frequency. The ancients were not naive. They did not build great stone structures without reason. They understood permanence, not in empire, but in waveform. They built for what would come after, knowing we would forget, knowing we would dig and doubt and dream. The Atlanteans, if they still speak not in voice, but in pattern. The same angles appear in crop circles and cathedral spires. The same ratios recur in hurricane arms and galaxy spirals. The same dreams repeat in the minds of those who have never met. A city of light. Sinking. Singing. Gone. And yet. A hum! Always a hum beneath it all. In the ruins of the Hypogeium in Malta, explorers have reported auditory hallucinations. Some describe hearing chants. Others say it feels like thought itself vibrates. Instruments confirm it. The stones amplify frequencies between 90 and 130 hertz, matching the human voice and the resonance of the heart. Coincidence? Or invitation? Perhaps the past does not recede. Perhaps it waits. Encoded in ruins, echoing in myth, humming in the silence before sleep. Atlantis is not behind us. It is around us. Just one vibration away. If you press your ear to the hollow of ancient stone, long enough, still enough, you may begin to hear it. Not a voice, not a sound, but a presence, a pressure, the residue of intent. Stone does not forget. It remembers not just the shape it was carved into, but the purpose of that carving. The silence within it carries echoes of the hands that shaped it, the chants that filled it, the alignments that gave it meaning. In the megalithic site of Carnac in France, thousands of granite-standing stones stretch across miles, aligned in strange, unwavering rows. No inscriptions, no tombs, no evidence of conquest or religion, just presence. Their arrangement is not random. Astronomers have found that some align with lunar standstill points, events that happen only every 18.6 years. Others follow telluric lines, subtle flows of the Earth's magnetic field. Why would Neolithic people, lacking metal tools and formal science, care about magnetic harmonics? Unless they weren't Neolithic. unless they were remembering something deeper, older, something Atlantean. Plato wrote that Atlantis fell because it forgot its divine nature, because it turned its knowledge into power, its harmony into hierarchy. And yet, in every ruin attributed to the age before the flood, we find not signs of tyranny, but of balance, sacred geometry, cosmic proportion, chambers tuned to specific frequencies. These were not empires of dominion. They were temples of alignment. We're told history began with the Sumerians, but even they, the supposed origin of civilization, claimed to inherit their knowledge from the Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens, not gods, but rememberers, carriers of codes, bearers of architecture and law and astronomy. One Sumerian cylinder seal shows a solar system with all known planets, including Uranus and Neptune, invisible to the naked eye, accurately placed in orbit. Modern scholars dismiss it as coincidence, symbolic abstraction. But the seal is too precise, too deliberate. How could a culture 5,000 years ago know what we only confirmed with telescopes in the last 2 centuries? Unless they didn't discover it. Unless they remembered it. In Egypt, the Temple of Dendera holds another riddle, the Dendera Zodiac. A circular map of the heavens unlike any other, featuring unknown constellations and planetary groupings. Above it floats the Be, the soul, winged, hovering over what appears to be a serpent coiled in loops. It is not mythology. It is cosmology, a spiral map of time itself. When overlaid with precessional cycles, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, it suggests a knowledge of celestial motion stretching over 26,000 years. A full great year. Who thinks on such a scale? We can barely hold 5 decades in memory before rewriting them with politics and media. But these people, they mapped eras. They built monuments not for lifespans, but for axial tilts. And all of it points to one thing. This knowledge was not emerging. It was inherited, preserved, retold, misunderstood, then mythologized. There's a term in linguistics, substrate language, a forgotten tongue whose grammar or sounds survive inside a newer language, invisible scaffolding. Atlantis, perhaps, is a cultural substrate, not visible, not direct, but underneath everything we know. A hum beneath the song, a rhythm we dance to without hearing. In the Mayan ruins of Palenque, beneath the Temple of the Inscriptions, lies the sarcophagus of King Pakal. On its lid, a carving that launched decades of controversy. To some, it is a depiction of a ruler descending into the underworld. To others, it looks uncannily like a man piloting a machine, hands on levers, feet on pedals, flames beneath him. The symbolism is complex, multi-layered. But at the heart of it is motion, descent, transition, and the knowledge of what lies between worlds. Could Pakal have been a remembering king? A fragment of a lineage tracing back through the flood, back through stars, back through song? We will never know for certain. But the patterns continue. Always the spirals, always the stars, always the serpent wrapped around light. The Dogon people of Mali, long before Western astronomy confirmed it, spoke of Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye, orbiting Sirius A every 50 years. They described its density, its orbit, even its position. How? Their oral traditions say the knowledge was given to them. From the sky, from water beings called Nomo. Fish-like, radiant, descending in a vessel that spun like a seed. We dismiss such tales as symbolic. But symbolism is how memory survives when truth becomes dangerous. And perhaps that is what Atlantis was. Not a city of stone, but a memory too powerful to be left visible. So it sank, not just into the ocean, but into myth, into dream, into the spiral silence of collective forgetting. And now, as the world pulses again, climate shifting, poles wandering, dreams intensifying, perhaps the vibration begins to rise. Perhaps we, too, are nearing the threshold of another resonance. Perhaps Atlantis does not wait to be found. Only heard, only harmonized. A note just beyond the edge of now. There is a place in the ocean where compasses spin without reason, where time fractures slightly, where birds lose their path and machines fall quiet. The Bermuda Triangle, a name that evokes mystery, fear, ridicule. But before the jetliners and cargo ships vanished, before the myths of magnetic storms and alien abductions took hold, there were older stories. Tales told by the Taino people, the Arawak, and even whispered among early seafarers. That beneath those waters lies a temple, or a door, or a memory too immense to be allowed to surface. And in 2001, a team of researchers using sonar off the coast of Cuba announced they had found it, or something. Deep below the surface, in the Yucatan Channel, they mapped symmetrical stone structures, columns, pyramids, wide avenues, all resting at a depth impossible for any known civilization. The scientific community dismissed it as pareidolia, a trick of light and stone. But the engineers who scanned it weren't mystics, they were data analysts. They saw edges where nature does not make edges, intersections too precise to be accidental. The data disappeared quietly. No follow-up, no explanation. Just silence, as always. And yet the dream persists. In South India, the 7 pagodas of Mahabalipuram were said to line the coast, glittering with gold and echoing with chants. Today, only one remains above ground. But after the 2004 tsunami briefly pulled back the sea, fishermen reported the silhouette of submerged structures, pillars, steps, statues. Archaeologists dived. They confirmed it. Remnants of buildings older than any known temple in the region, resting silently beneath the water like sleeping witnesses. The ocean is not a grave. It is a vault. A library written in pressure and salt and silence. So what lies encoded there, buried in silt and fear and scientific denial? The answer may not come from stone. It may come from sleep. Across the world, people dream of the same city. They do not know each other. They do not speak the same language. But they describe it in uncanny detail. White towers gleaming beneath a golden dome, streets paved in a spiral toward a central pool, voices that hum without words, and light, not from the sun, but from the very walls. Some wake weeping. Some wake inspired. Some wake with blueprints drawn by hand they've never trained to draw. Is this madness? Or memory? The Atlanteans, if they were what the myths suggest, may have known how to store knowledge in form beyond language, memory not trapped in symbols, but in vibration. Not written, but imprinted. Carried forward through birth and death, embedded in the energetic scaffolding of the human field. We speak of genetic memory, ancestral trauma, epigenetics, how experience ripples across generations, shaping bodies and behaviors long after the original stimulus is forgotten. If trauma can echo, why not wonder? Why not all? Why not the memory of a city that once sang? In the Pacific, the island of Nan Madol rises from a lagoon like the bones of a forgotten empire. Massive basalt columns stacked like logs, an impossible feat given their weight and number. The locals say it was built by sorcerers who flew the stones through the air using chants. That it was a place of great power, but one that had to be abandoned when the ocean turned against it. Geologists call it an enigma. Engineers call it a marvel. But there are no cranes, no wheel marks, no answers. Only repetition, always the same rhythm. An impossible structure. A flood. A silence. A dream. And perhaps this is the shape of the fall. Not a single night, as Plato writes, but a long, low dirge, played out across the world in dissonant chords. A retreat of knowledge not in fire, but in forgetfulness. A civilization collapsing not from outside, but from a breakdown in resonance. They forgot how to sing with the earth, and so the earth forgot them. But not entirely. In the Andes, the Kogi people live in seclusion, calling themselves the Elder Brothers. They say the world is out of tune, that we, the younger brothers, have forgotten the song. They carry knowledge in thread, in symbol, in silence. They do not build monuments. They do not seek converts. They remember, and they warn, that we are near another rupture, that the hum of the world is strained again. Perhaps Atlantis was not a place, but a frequency, a state of coherence between humanity and earth. And perhaps that state can be re-entered, not by digging into mud, but by tuning ourselves inward. By listening to the dreams, by following the spiral. There are no maps to Atlantis, because Atlantis is not found. It is remembered, in symbols that defy translation, in ruins that defy gravity, in dreams that refuse to be dismissed. A city drowned in silence, but still singing. Somewhere beneath your skin, waiting. Not all ruins lie beneath the ocean. Some are buried in plain sight, beneath cities, beneath temples, beneath language itself. Like a second skin over reality, the modern world walks atop the bones of something older, something quieter, something still pulsing with forgotten intent. We pave over patterns. We build upon alignments. But the earth remembers. And sometimes, when we least expect it, the past breathes upward through cracks in the stone. In central Turkey, the site of Göbekli Tepe shatters everything we thought we knew. Vast circular enclosures, T-shaped monoliths etched with animals and symbols, arranged in orientations that seem to follow lunar and stellar movements. 12,000 years old, if not older. Predating the wheel, the written word, agriculture. Yet the craftsmanship is not primitive, it is precise. The artistry is not hesitant, it is fluent. The builders were not learning, they were remembering. But remembering what? The mainstream narrative has no room for this. Civilization was supposed to begin after 4000 BCE. Before that, only hunter-gatherers. Yet here is a site built with forethought, astronomy, and symbolic language. A temple before the city, spirit before survival. Something drove these people to carve stone from the earth, not for shelter, but for meaning, for memory. And then they buried it, carefully, intentionally. Why would anyone bury a sacred complex? Unless they feared what would come after. Unless they knew forgetting was inevitable. Unless they hoped that one day someone would dig, not with conquest, but with listening. Some of the carvings on the monoliths appear abstract, but when analyzed through the lens of archaeoastronomy, They resemble star charts. Pillar 43, the so-called vulture stone, may depict the position of constellations during a comet impact that coincides with the Younger Dryas cooling event, a cosmic trauma, a flashpoint of extinction and disruption. Could it be that the builders were not honoring the stars, but warning us? That this site is a message left across epochs? Not, we were here, but this will happen again. If Atlantis was real, and if its end came through celestial violence, then perhaps the survivors, the scattered keepers of that memory, encoded their warning not in words, but in architecture, not in scrolls, but in stone. And if so, then Göbekli Tepe is not an origin story. It is a lighthouse, a flare sent forward through time, its light dulled by dust and denial, now glowing faintly as we begin to look backward, with eyes unclouded by dogma. Far to the west, across the Atlantic, in the basin of the Amazon, another silence is breaking. For centuries, the jungle was thought impenetrable, untouched. But now, with LiDAR technology stripping away the canopy, we are seeing it. Straight roads, vast geometric earthworks, city grids overgrown with trees, evidence of millions who once lived in balance with the forest, leaving little waste, but much pattern. A lost civilization. Perhaps not technologically advanced in the modern sense, but in another way, in harmony, in resonance. Their cities did not dominate the earth. They moved with it. Their geometry echoed stars and rivers. They grew food not in rows, but in spirals. The forest was their cathedral, their partner. What if these were the children of Atlantis? Not culturally descended, but vibrationally aligned. What if the true legacy of that sunken land is not power, but pattern? Not machines, but memory embedded in space and form. In the Orkney Islands, off the coast of Scotland, stone circles older than Stonehenge sit aligned to solstices, equinoxes, lunar maxima. The builders are nameless, their purpose unknown. Yet the stones still stand, still hum in the wind, still cast shadows that mark the breath of the cosmos. And always the spiral, carved into rock faces, drawn in red ochre, twisting like galaxies, like DNA, like the very path we walk in dream. Even our myths remember this motion, the descent and return, the flood and the flowering, the golden age, the fall and the rise, again and again. Atlantis may not be an exception. It may be the pattern itself, a node in the spiral, a necessary forgetting, so that remembering can matter, so that rediscovery can awaken something deeper than knowledge, reverence. Because Atlantis, if it sang, did so in frequencies now drowned by machines. If it healed, it did so with light and tone, not steel and fire. If it fell, perhaps it wasn't through arrogance, but exhaustion. Perhaps the resonance could not hold. Perhaps the earth shifted, and their key no longer fit the lock. And so they left echoes. In dreams, in temples, in us. The artist tracing spirals without knowing why. The child drawing cities that do not exist. The dreamer walking streets that shimmer with light too soft to be electric. Memory lives. It breathes beneath the bones of cities and beneath the skin of thought. And the hum, it grows louder. It begins perhaps not with a city sinking, but with a silence falling, a sudden hush in the music of the world, like the orchestra ceased playing, and the instruments, temples, minds, tides forgot their parts. No fire, no explosion, just a stillness so deep it shattered memory itself. There are stories of people vanishing, not from sight but from continuity, of lineages that end not in death but in dissonance, of a knowledge that once resonated in every breath, now hidden behind the static of time. Atlantis, if it was ever here, may not have disappeared, but been erased gently, like chalk from a board washed clean by the tide. And the tide comes in strange places. In the desert sands of Utah, beneath petroglyphs carved by the ancestral Puebloans, there are spirals that seem to move, not literally, but when sunlight strikes them at certain angles, they animate. They pulse. Some align with the solstice, others with eclipses. Why would a people who left no written record care so deeply about celestial mechanics? Because the sky once spoke. Because time once sang. In these spirals, we see the same forms echoed from Malta to Maltanyawi, from the Hopi mesas to the hills of Ireland, a geometry shared across oceans, as if all cultures once held the same compass, not pointing north, but inward, toward a memory they could no longer name, only draw. There are myths of beings who arrived from the sea after the Great Flood, always tall, always radiant, always silent at first. In Polynesia, they were the Tupua. In Egypt, the Neteru. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl. In Dogon cosmology, Nomo. Never conquerors, always teachers. But they never stayed. They came when the earth was quiet, when the flood receded, when the stars returned to their proper places. They came to plant, not crops, but memory. A seed must be buried before it breaks open. Maybe knowledge is the same. Maybe the Atlanteans, if that's even what they called themselves, understood this, that the fall wasn't failure, but fermentation. That what they once were could not survive in the new world, not in form, only in frequency, only in silence and symbol. And so they became myth, not to be dismissed but to be protected, because the mind resists fiction, but the heart remembers song. In 1976, a strange structure was discovered beneath the ice of Antarctica by satellite imaging. Angular ridges, square formations, shadows inconsistent with nature. The images were quietly classified, but whispers surfaced. That something, some vast construction, lay beneath miles of ancient ice, perfectly preserved. Not a base, not a ruin, a vault. And the coordinates? Aligned with the constellation Orion during a celestial event last occurring over 12,000 years ago. Always the same number. Always that cycle. 12,000 years. One great year. One breath of the earth. Some now believe Antarctica was once temperate, once green, once inhabited. That its current form is not its original one. That a crustal shift moved the continent suddenly, freezing whatever was there in a moment of terror and preservation. If Atlantis was a global civilization, as many myths suggest, then perhaps its capital sank, but its libraries scattered. One beneath ice, one beneath sand, one beneath dream. And the key to each? Resonance. Always resonance. Modern physics tells us reality is vibration. String theory, quantum entanglement, the observer effect, all pointing to a universe that does not exist until it is heard, or seen, or felt. Atlantis may have been the last time humanity lived in harmony with that truth, before the fall into materialism, before the descent into separation. We now live in echoes. We call them archetypes, symbols, patterns of mind that keep returning, even when their source is forgotten. The trident, the eye, the spiral. They follow us through history like footprints we mistake for stars. In India's Temple of Ellora, cut into the rock by means unknown, A massive structure, Kailasa Temple, was carved from a single stone. Not built, but removed, subtracted, an entire mountain shaped into symmetry, scale, and song. Engineers today cannot replicate it without modern tools. But the temple was made without iron, without machines. So they say. Yet here it stands, aligned to celestial points, resonating when chanted within. Not myth, stone, real, but its builders? Gone, or silent, or simply humming beneath our bones. We live in the ruins of a memory we no longer recognize. But something in us stirs when we touch certain stones, when we hear certain frequencies, when we close our eyes and dream of light beneath the sea. Atlantis is not a city. It is a condition, a state of harmony between the seen and the unseen. And when we lost that harmony, we called it myth. We buried it beneath reason and forgot the rhythm that built the world. But even now, if you sit still enough, quiet enough, long enough, you may feel it, just beneath the noise. A pulse, a breath, a city dreaming. Not every ruin is made of stone. Some are carved in the ether, shaped by time and thought, and left behind like fingerprints on the glass of reality. Atlantis may have no streets we can walk today, no doors we can knock on. But still it lingers, hovering like a ghost between memory and myth. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was never meant to be found in the physical. Perhaps Atlantis is the echo of a world that learned how to shape matter with mind and song with light, and that secret was too fragile to survive the tremors of forgetting. There's an idea whispered in the corridors of both mysticism and quantum science, that consciousness shapes reality. That matter is not fixed, but formed by observation, by intention, by resonance. And what if, long ago, a civilization learned how to master this principle? Not in theory, but in practice. What if the Atlanteans were less inventors of machines and more conductors of mind? Not conquerors of land, but builders of form itself? If that's true, then Atlantis did not fall. It faded. The vibration lowered, the coherence scattered, and those who remained, those few who remembered, buried the keys in myth and metaphor, waiting for a time when we might once again hear the frequency of truth without needing it to bleed. In the heart of the Himalayas, some Buddhist monks speak of a language that is not spoken but emanated, a pure tone that carries entire concepts, entire teachings in a single breath. They say this was once the language of the gods, of the devas, of the ancients who spoke directly to the earth. And there are stories, fragmented, fragile, that suggest this was once common. That language was not a tool of separation, but of synthesis. That a word could change water. That a chant could reshape bone. That a song could lift a stone from the ground like a feather in a breeze. We find strange traces in our oldest myths, the walls of Jericho falling to trumpets, the megaliths of Stonehenge rumored to have been floated into place by music, the solfeggio tones, long ignored by modern tuning standards, yet said to repair DNA, shift consciousness, and open gateways within the mind. It sounds like fantasy, but physics already tells us everything vibrates. From the spin of electrons to the waves of gravity moving through space-time, vibration is not decoration. It is the structure of being. So what if the Atlanteans knew how to tune the world? What if their architecture was not just built, but sung into form? In Egypt, the temples at Karnak and Luxor hold proportions that match not only celestial cycles, but harmonic ratios. When sound is played at certain frequencies in their chambers, resonance maps reveal patterns identical to sacred geometry, mandalas of vibration. Standing there, a whisper feels like a roar. A breath seems to ripple outward like wind through wheat. These are not accidents. These are echoes. The same can be said of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, an entire city laid out as a mirror of the constellation Draco, its towers aligned with the solstices, its steps echoing the lunar calendar. Why such precision, unless the builders believed that the heavens were not above but within, that to walk the temple was to move through time, that memory was held not in the mind but in the body's motion through form? Again and again, we find the same logic. Stars mirrored in stone, tones embedded in temples, proportions matching the pulse of planets. Atlantis, if it was, may have been a civilization that understood the body, the planet, and the cosmos as one integrated field. A symphony. And when one note went wrong, when greed, fear, or desperation entered the chord, it was not a war that ended them. It was a disharmony. A cracking of the key, like a crystal shattered by the wrong pitch. And so the cities fell. Or perhaps they sank. Or perhaps they turned inwards, disappearing behind veils of lower vibration, inaccessible not because they were destroyed, but because we can no longer see them. Unless we tune. Unless we remember. In certain rare states, near-death experiences, deep trance, fevered dreams, people describe cities of impossible light, halls of knowing, structures that feel alive. Often they describe domes, concentric circles, water that glows, language not spoken but known, time not passing but folding. These experiences match across continents, ages, cultures. Children with no exposure to myth recount the same city. Are these visions of heaven? Or echoes of Atlantis? Could it be that the memory is collective not because it is fiction, but because we all came from it? Because it happened? Because it lives in the lattice of what we are? DNA is not just a code. It is a record, a songbook. And some researchers have begun to ask, what if ancient trauma and ancient wonder can be inherited? If so, then Atlantis is not just something we seek. It is something we are. A broken chord, longing for resolution. A vibration half heard, trembling beneath the surface of waking life. And as we build towers again, play with forces we don't understand again, split atoms and pull at the seams of nature again, perhaps the memory stirs. Perhaps the earth, too, remembers. Perhaps the sea still sings, quietly, waiting. There is a trembling in the collective dreamscape, subtle but unmistakable. A quickening in the places between thought and silence, as if something long buried is beginning to stir again. Not with fury, but with memory. A slow unfolding. The sound of forgotten frequencies reaching toward the waking world, like roots pressing against the floorboards of time. We speak now, without irony, of simulation theory, of holographic universes, of consciousness not as a byproduct of the brain, but as the very architecture of reality. Scientists map the cosmos and find fractal symmetry. Physicists study black holes and discover the edge of information. Mathematicians dream in golden ratios. What once was myth is now the frontier of understanding. And what if it was never new? What if Atlantis, in its time, stood not on the edge of mystery, but in mastery of it, not as a kingdom of fantastical devices and flying machines, but as a culture that knew how to bend form with thought, how to carve space with frequency, how to honor the unseen currents that hold the fabric of reality together. What we are now rediscovering, they once embodied. What we call esoteric, they called natural. The Library of Alexandria burned. But what of the libraries before it? The great house of record said to lie beneath the Sphinx, spoken of in Hermetic texts and whispered by mystics across the centuries. Plato's pupil Crantor claimed that Egyptian priests showed him a subterranean hall of knowledge, inscribed in stone, written in symbols so ancient they were unreadable even then. Could it have been Atlantean? Could the survivors, those who fled the fall, have hidden what remained not just to protect it, but because we were not yet ready to hold it again? Knowledge without resonance is a weapon. Wisdom without coherence is noise. The ancients may have known that the deepest truths must be buried until the song of the world rises again to match them. And the earth itself remembers. Under the ice of Greenland, under the sands of the Sahara, under the volcanic fields of Antarctica, gravitational anomalies persist. Places where the mass is wrong, the pull-off, the field distorted. Some are explained by geology, others remain blank spots on the map of understanding. But the shapes, they are not always random. Some are rectangular, some concentric. Some echo the geometry described by Plato and mirrored in temples from Angkor to Chichen Itza. Cities leave scars. Even if the wind and water bury them, the earth doesn't forget the weight. There are those who claim to have seen Atlantis in dreams, not as ruin, but as light, not as structure, but as song. They describe towers made of crystal, not quartz alone, but living crystal, resonant, reactive, refracting consciousness itself. Halls where thought became visible, gardens where sound sculpted trees, temples where silence was worshipped, not for what it lacked, but for what it allowed. These are not fantasies. Or if they are shared. Strikingly similar accounts appear across generations and geographies. No shared culture, no shared language, just shared memory. Jung called this the archetype. Others call it ancestral memory. But perhaps it is something else. Perhaps it is an invitation, a pull toward coherence, toward remembrance. Because Atlantis, if it ever was, does not belong to the past. It belongs to the pattern. A rhythm that repeats not in time, but in tone. A high note in the spiral of civilization that can only be struck when we are ready to hear it. And what if readiness is not technological? What if it's vibrational? What if the gates to that kind of world open not with keys, but with alignment? In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers, beings of immense knowledge, descend to teach humanity sacred arts, metallurgy, herbalism, astronomy, and enchantment. But the knowledge is misused. The balance is broken. The flood comes. Again and again. A cycle of ascent, corruption, collapse. But within each collapse, seeds are carried forward. A child hidden. A book preserved. A whisper kept. So perhaps Atlantis is not something to be discovered, but something to be remembered and built again. Not with machines, but with mind. Not in form, but in harmony. A civilization not of structures, but of states. A place not made of matter, but of meaning. Could we live in such a world? Could we remember how? Or have we drifted too far down the scale of forgetting? And yet, the spiral turns. Old ideas return in new forms. Ancient teachings emerge cloaked in new vocabulary. Mystics and scientists find themselves speaking, unknowingly, of the same truths. And perhaps that's the beginning. Not a sudden return, not a continent rising from the sea, but a tuning, a slow, soft shift in the chord of human awareness, a remembering in layers, a resonance returning. Atlantis may have drowned in water, but we have drowned in noise. And now silence beckons again, not as absence, but as a chamber of re-entry. A temple waiting, a key within the hum. There is a sound that comes before thunder, a rumble so deep it passes through the skin, into the bone, and further still, into the memory that does not use words. You've felt it before, haven't you? That moment when the world seems to hold its breath, when everything goes just a little too quiet. That pause is not empty. It is full. Something is listening, or remembering. Atlantis, if it ever was, may now exist in that silence. Not beneath waves of water, but beneath waves of perception. Hidden not by depth, but by density, of thought, of time, of forgetting. There are those who say the Earth is awakening, that the Schumann resonance, Earth's natural heartbeat, is shifting, quickening, that the planet is not just changing environmentally, but energetically. And if so, might it be that the resonance of old is rising again? That what was lost to us not by destruction, but by descent into lower vibration, is beginning to return? In that case, Atlantis is not just history. It is future memory, waiting for us to rise high enough in tone to see it again. A few years ago, deep-sea scans in the Caribbean revealed a hexagonal pattern on the ocean floor, stretching over 2 miles. The formation didn't match any known coral structure or tectonic process. Too precise, too symmetrical. The images surfaced briefly, then vanished. The expedition was redirected. The team changed subject. Why is it that when we approach the edge of remembering, the silence thickens? Not from nature, but from narrative. From the story we're told to keep telling, that humanity began in mud and climbed slowly into light. But what if that's only the middle of the story? What if we came from light, fell into mud, and are only now beginning to remember how to rise again? In the teachings of the Essenes, an ancient mystical sect said to precede both Judaism and Christianity, it was believed that divine knowledge was kept in the spaces between sounds, in the silent intervals, that the voice of creation spoke not in words, but in vibration so pure it could only be heard when the soul was still enough. They believed the earth was alive, not metaphorically, but tonally, that every rock, every tree, every human was a note in the great chord of being. Disease, they said, was a loss of tone, and healing was a return to the original pitch. Could Atlantis have been the last time humanity lived in full resonance with the earth's song? Could that be why the symbols carved in their remnants, those spirals, those eyes, those stars with many points, keep showing up in sacred geometry and neurological diagrams alike? In Peru, the Nazca lines stretch across the desert like messages to the sky. Straight lines, perfect curves, shapes visible only from the air. Birds, monkeys, a humanoid waving. Some say they were made for the gods, others for astronomical tracking. But one figure stands out. The spiral, carved not as decoration, but as intention. A vortex, a return, a way in. Maybe the Nazca weren't sending messages outward. Maybe they were mapping portals within. Across the world, in Australia's Arnhem Land, the Yolngu people speak of the Wawalag sisters, ancestral beings who sang the world into being by naming it. They believe the land remembers those songs, that wrongs committed upon it echo and must be healed through ceremony, not punishment, harmony, not hierarchy. They don't call it technology. They call it truth. But truth and technology were not always opposites. The Atlanteans, if the myths carry any substance, built machines not just of metal, but of mind. Devices that responded to thought, structures that adjusted to emotional resonance. Perhaps not machines at all, but instruments. Tools that required not only intellect, but coherence of spirit. It is said that their greatest temples were not for worship, but for attunement. Places to balance, to remember, to recalibrate the human field with the greater field of being. One such temple is said to have stood at the center of the capital, Poseidonia, encircled by rings of water and land, as Plato described. At its heart, a crystal column, glowing from within, alive with internal light. Not electricity, not fire, something else. A harmonized field, a pillar of resonance. The symbol of this column, curiously, appears in other cultures. In Norse myth, it is Yggdrasil, the world tree. In Hindu tradition, it is the Meru axis. In Egyptian lore, it is the Djed, the backbone of Osiris, the pillar that holds heaven and earth together. Always vertical, always central, always humming with the power of memory and rebirth. Could it be that all of these are echoes of the same idea? That at the center of the Atlantean world stood not a throne, but a tuning fork? And that its fall was not the loss of land, but the loss of center? The Djed, in ritual, is raised during the festival of Koyak to symbolize the restoration of order after chaos. It is not merely symbolic, it is sonic. The rites are chanted in tones designed to stimulate resonance up the spine, the literal raising of energy through vibration. This was known. This was practiced. And then forgotten. Buried beneath conquest and creed, but not destroyed. Because vibration, once set in motion, does not disappear. It lingers. Even now, the Atlantean hum may be vibrating in the architecture of your bones, the rhythm of your breath, the geometry of your cells. Waiting for re-entry. Waiting for remembrance. Waiting for silence deep enough to hear the sound again. There is a dream older than sleep. A vision passed through blood, not thought. It flickers behind closed eyelids like the memory of light. Not sunlight, but another kind. A crystalline shimmer, diffused through water, through time. You may have seen it once, in that space between waking and falling, when the mind loosens and the soul peers through. A city beneath the sea, not ruined but glowing. Whole. Waiting. That is not imagination. That is inheritance. The Atlantean memory, if such a thing exists, does not live in facts. It lives in pattern, in pulse, in that strange pull you feel when standing in ancient ruins, even when their origin is forgotten. A sense that something important happened here, something that left no language, but left the walls humming. And sometimes the hum grows stronger. In 2003, divers exploring a submerged shelf off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan, stumbled upon what appeared to be a massive stepped structure. Terraces, right angles, megalithic proportions. Critics claimed it was a natural formation, but subsequent dives revealed tool marks, carved tunnels, and what some described as a ceremonial throne. The local Ryukyuan myths speak of a sunken kingdom, a place of light and wisdom, a fall beneath the waves. Again, the echo. Different continent, same frequency. It happens too often to ignore. In South Africa, stone circles dot the landscape in patterns too intentional to be cattle pens, too numerous to be chance. The oldest, according to controversial but persistent research, dates back over 200,000 years, older than the pyramids, older than the ice. But here's what's stranger. Some of the circles emit electromagnetic fields, weak but measurable, and they resonate, not at random frequencies, but at those connected to the so-called healing tones found in ancient music traditions. Were they calendars? Energy centers? Sound amplifiers? Or were they Atlantean echoes left behind in an even older age, when memory moved through rhythm, not record? We assume time is linear. We assume knowledge begins, grows, and is lost. But what if knowledge spirals? What if it sinks only to rise again, in another form, in another place, when the vibration of the world allows? A few years ago, researchers at CERN discovered something unexpected. That under extreme conditions, particles can pop in and out of existence, not just vanish, but leave a trace of where they were. The quantum field, they now believe, is a sea of probabilities waiting to be observed. This is not magic. It is physics, and yet it sounds eerily like what mystics have said for millennia. That reality is a vibration fixed by attention. That thought collapses potential into form. That the observer shapes the world. So imagine a people who knew this, not in theory but in practice. Imagine a civilization that aligned thought, emotion, and intention with geometry and sound to construct their reality, not just externally, but internally. This was Atlantis, not a mythic utopia, but a harmonic phase of human consciousness, a chord struck in the great song of time. And like all chords, it faded, not in fire, not in flood, but in forgetting. And yet the notes still linger, in architecture that doesn't fit the tools of its age, in myths that repeat across oceans with no shared script, in a dream you've had more than once, the one with the blue domes, the light beneath the water, the hall of mirrors that sings. You see, remembering Atlantis isn't about proving it, it's about recognizing it, in the moments that don't quite fit. The knowledge you've never learned but always known. The ache for a place you've never been. The feeling that something is missing, not in the world, but in us. That we've built up, but not in. That we've reached far, but not deep. That we've learned to speak, but forgotten how to listen. Because Atlantis listened. To the earth. To the stars. To the silence between the stars. And in that listening, they built, not monuments, but mirrors, reflections of the cosmic order, in temple, in tone, in self. And maybe that's why it had to fall, because we were not ready to hold the mirror, because we looked, and instead of seeing the divine, we saw only our reflection, and shattered it. And so the pieces scattered, beneath oceans, beneath deserts, beneath bone, waiting not to be assembled, but to be remembered. There is a particular kind of silence that lives inside the oldest stones, a hush that doesn't just quiet the air, it quiets the mind. It happens in the dark chambers of forgotten temples, in the cracked remains of stone circles where wind whistles through like memory. And in that stillness, something ancient leans close. Not a voice, but a feeling. like being watched by something that loves you, but no longer expects to be recognized. Atlantis may have been such a watcher. Not a place to be found, but a presence that waits for the right tone of attention. And what if that tone isn't just curiosity or intellect, but reverence? The ancients spoke of reverence not as fear, but as alignment. To walk with bare feet on sacred ground, to approach the unseen without needing to dissect it, to feel that the earth, the sky, the stars, and the self are not separate stories, but chapters in a single book, written in frequencies, bound by geometry, and read only through vibration. This was the Atlantean mind, not one that conquered matter but collaborated with it. They saw the body as a symphony. Disease, to them, was a disharmony. Healing wasn't surgery, it was song. Crystals weren't trinkets, they were storage devices, resonance chambers, tuning forks for the soul. And so their technology looked nothing like ours. No wires, no engines, no screens. Instead, it pulsed in rhythms, aligned with lunar cycles, solar flares, planetary conjunctions. Cities built like mandalas. Waterways designed not only for irrigation, but for modulation. Temperature, tone, pressure. Water as memory. Water as conductor. Water as song. Today, we are just beginning to understand that water records, that it changes molecular structure when exposed to emotion, to music, to prayer. Masaru Emoto's controversial studies showed water forming crystalline shapes when spoken to with love, and chaotic forms when shouted at with hate. We dismissed it because we forgot. But the Atlanteans, it seems, remembered. And maybe they didn't invent these things. Maybe they were the inheritors too. Maybe Atlantis wasn't the first civilization, but the last one to remember how to listen. To the stars, to the stones, to the silence between both. In Bolivia's high plateau, Tiwanaku stands in inexplicable ruin. The Gate of the Sun, carved from a single block of andesite, depicts what some call the Weeping God, surrounded by strange symbols, some resembling binary code, others planetary glyphs. The site is aligned to solstice sunrises. Its blocks weigh hundreds of tons, cut with angles so precise even modern machinery struggles. No one knows who built it. No one knows why. But nearby, legend tells of a civilization destroyed by the gods for breaking the balance. Not for war, not for greed, but for sound. They played a tone that opened a gate, and something came through. Something they could not hold. This story repeats elsewhere. In the myths of ancient China, the Yellow Emperor is said to have wielded a tone so pure it could realign the heavens. In India, the sound AUM is believed to be the seed of all form. In Ireland, the Tuatha De Danann arrived in flying halls of crystal and ruled not with weapons, but with music and light. Again, again, again. Sound. Resonance. Memory. The lost civilization wasn't just technologically advanced, it was harmonically alive. So when it fell, what truly vanished wasn't their buildings. It was their tone. And in that collapse, humanity dropped into a lower octave. Still singing, but off-key. Still building, but without the melody. Still surviving, but no longer remembering why. We became obsessed with stone because we forgot the sound behind it. Obsessed with power because we forgot balance. Obsessed with knowledge because we forgot wisdom. Atlantis wasn't lost because it was destroyed. It was lost because we could no longer hear it. Not with ears, with being. And now, as the spiral turns, as solar flares increase, and magnetic poles shift, and consciousness collectively trembles at the edge of forgetting again. Perhaps the hum returns, softly, like a dream you didn't know you were having until you woke up crying, like a city beneath the sea calling not for rescue, but for remembrance. And perhaps the gates do not open outward. Perhaps they open inward, and Atlantis rises not from the ocean, but from the soul, somewhere in the space between breath and thought, between heartbeat and memory. There is a doorway. You won't find it marked on any map. You won't see it in the architecture of modern cities. But it is there, beneath cathedral foundations, behind the humming in stone circles, in the rhythm of waves that crash upon forgotten shores. It waits not to be opened, but to be remembered. And that is the final mystery of Atlantis. Perhaps it was never truly lost. Perhaps it was sealed. Sealed not by catastrophe, but by intention. Because not all knowledge is meant to endure unguarded. There is a kind of wisdom that cannot be passed down through books or codes. It must be felt, in silence, in awe, in that strange sense of standing before something so vast, so precise, it strips you of certainty. The Atlanteans, if the scattered fragments speak true, understood this. They didn't just build with stone, they built with meaning. Every pillar, every corridor, every glyph was a resonance, a song of structure. And when the world shifted, when the cycle turned, they did not try to hold on to their age. They let it go, not out of defeat, but out of trust that the time would come again, that the spiral would return, that we would remember. This is why so many of the megalithic sites we call ruins appear buried, as if intentionally hidden, covered in soil, sealed in ice, swallowed by jungle. Göbekli Tepe, Gunung Padang, the sunken roads off the Bimini coast, the crystalline caverns beneath the Yucatan. Why hide such works of precision, such feats of engineering? Unless their creators wanted them to sleep. Unless they knew that the danger lay not in forgetting, but in remembering too soon, because there is power in harmony. And power out of tune becomes destruction. Perhaps that is the truth behind the flood myths, not punishment but protection, not wrath but rhythm. To reset the instrument, to lower the volume until we could tune again. There is a resonance we're beginning to hear again. Faint, like a chord remembered in the bones. We hear it in the studies of cymatics, where sound creates patterns in sand and water, perfect mandalas, shifting with each frequency. We hear it in the discoveries of sonoluminescence, where sound causes light to flash inside collapsing bubbles of water. Light born from vibration. The ancients told us this in metaphor. Let there be light, and the word was first. Creation through tone, through song. Modern science stumbles toward this truth, cloaked in math and hypothesis. But the Atlanteans may have lived it. There are stories, ignored, ridiculed, quietly buried, of people who return from near-death experiences not with visions of heaven, but with architectures of light. Cities where thought shapes form, where color is language, where doors open through intention, and knowledge arrives not as data, but as resonance. They always say the same thing. It felt more real than this. And maybe that's the key. Maybe Atlantis was not just a civilization, it was a state of coherence, a moment in which the human, the planetary, and the cosmic tones all aligned. And in that alignment, a gateway opened to knowledge, to energy, to what we now call the divine, though it may have been simply natural at a higher octave. And when the tone fractured, when we lost the ability to hold that alignment, we fell. Not just beneath waves, but beneath ourselves. And yet, pieces remained. In temples that hum when the wind moves right. In dreams shared by children born oceans apart. In symbols that appear in trance, in visions, on cave walls from France to Australia. Spirals, tridents, eyes, suns with many rays. In the sudden grief you feel when you look at the stars and cannot name why you miss them. That is the echo of Atlantis, not a myth, a memory with no language, a song half heard. And now, as the solar cycles peak, as Earth's own frequencies tremble, as more people awaken not just mentally, but vibrationally, the doorway quivers. Not to be entered, to be remembered. Because perhaps Atlantis was never meant to be rebuilt with hands, but with tone, with stillness, with coherence, with the resonance of a species ready not to dominate the earth, but to harmonize with it again. And perhaps we are close, not by reaching forward, but by listening back. Close your eyes. Listen, not with your ears, but with that deeper faculty beneath thought, beneath language, beneath self. Can you feel it now? That trembling at the edge of memory, that resonance in the chest, that strange, luminous ache that feels like longing for something you never knew, and yet somehow have always missed. That is the song. That is Atlantis, not a place but a pulse, not a myth but a mirror, a civilization that lived not by conquest, but by coherence. A people who didn't rise through steel and fire, but through resonance, tuning themselves to the frequencies of the earth, the stars, and the field of consciousness that links all things. Their towers weren't built to reach the sky. They sang with it. Their machines didn't burn fuel. They translated will into form. Their society did not grow by controlling others. It evolved through remembering who they were. And who were they? Not gods, not aliens, not fantasies, but us before the forgetting. Us when the human body was not just biology, but instrument. When thought did not race ahead of spirit. When silence was not emptiness, but entrance. And if we carry that memory, if we feel it stir in dreams, in ruins, in sudden, tearful nostalgia, we must ask, is Atlantis not behind us, but ahead? A memory of the future, a blueprint encoded in myth, in every golden age myth, every Eden, every Shambhala, every lost world sung into silence, there is the same arc, harmony, disruption, descent. But within each is also the promise of return, a new cycle, a rising from the waters not of ocean, but of awakening. The spiral doesn't only go down, it turns back up. Always. What the ancients called returning to the stars may not have been ascension through flight, but through frequency, through remembering the tone of who we are before fear, before hierarchy, before fracture. The Hopi speak of the fifth world, just ahead, just beyond the veil. A world where balance is restored, where those who remember the old songs will help tune the new earth. The Maya calendar, so misunderstood, never predicted the end. It marked the turn, the end of one resonance, the beginning of another. So perhaps Atlantis does not rise from the sea. Perhaps it rises in us, in the way we begin to see pattern again, in the way we feel time bending, thinning, in the way the old stories no longer seem foolish, but familiar. This isn't romanticism, it's frequency recognition. The hum beneath modern noise is getting louder. We are remembering without knowing why, drawn to sacred geometry, to ancient texts, to long walks in the forest where no answers come, but everything feels whole again. That is the Atlantean field re-emerging. Not to dominate, but to guide. And maybe that's why the memory is so dreamlike, because dreams too are real in a different octave. Atlantis is a dream not to be proven, but to be lived into, to be approached like a temple, to be remembered in movement, in song, in stillness, not by building cities, but by becoming ones. Each of us a chamber, each of us a tone, each of us a doorway. And so we end not with conclusion, but with invitation. The ocean does not give back what it takes, but it sings of it. The earth does not forget the weight of memory. The stars still turn, and the silence still waits. Listen, beneath the noise, beneath the doubt, beneath the breath, there it is, the song of Atlantis, not lost, not sunken, just sleeping, just humming, just waiting for you to remember your note in its chord.